Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the Gadigal and Wongal people of the Eora Nation and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. The new Marrickville Library is situated on the site of the former Marrickville Hospital, which originally opened on the 10th of June 1899. The hospital grew and expanded, responding to community need and demand of a growing industrial suburb. The cottage hospital became the district hospital, and in 1958 a 7-storey training centre for nurses opened. This oral history interview was conducted as part of the opening of the new Marrickville Library, which opened August 31st, 2019. The interview is with former nurse Barbara Emslie, who started as a cadet nurse in 1962 and went on to work at the Marrickville Hospital and as a nurse for 5 decades.
This is an interview with Barbara Emslie in Marrickville on Monday the 1st of April 2019. The interviewer is Bruce Carter and we're at Marrickville Town Hall. Barbara, if I can ask you just to give me your name and your date of birth.
Barbara Suzanne Emslie, 1st of the 9th, 1945.
Okay, thanks. Barbara, let's just start by talking about where you grew up.
Okay. I grew up in Stanmore for the first 10 years of my life and went to Stanmore School till I was 10. Then we moved to Hurstville, where I went to Kingsgrove Primary School, till I went to high school. I went to Beverly Hills Girls High School.
Okay. So how many brothers and sisters?
One brother, older brother, yes.
Okay. And your parents?
My parents...
What were their names?
Barbara Joyce, maiden name Seagrave, and my father was Harold Jack Hosking.
Okay. So you were Barbara Hosking. Mm-hmm. Yep. And tell me a little bit about school in Stanmore. Can you remember that at all?
Absolutely. I can't remember, I shouldn't say that, I can't remember what I had for breakfast, but I can remember that. Yes, I can remember my 3rd class teacher was Mrs. White. It was, it had a reunion, I know a 100-year celebration. I've still got my badge from there.
A large school?
Boys and girls, yes, probably a large school. Mm.
When you moved, did that have any was that an okay experience for you?
Moving was good. Going to school on my first day was awful. I was 10, just 10, and I can remember my teacher saying, well, you've just come from this area, you'll know how to spell Leichhardt. And Leichhardt is not an easy name to spell, right. And I didn't know, and I cried, and I still have a friend from those years, and she remembers and went home and told her mother that this new girl cried, but after that, you make friends and move on.
So your parents moved for a bigger, better house,
yes.
A more comfortable
yes.
standard of living?
Yes. We lived in a double brick, single-fronted house, and we moved for 2 bedrooms, and then we moved to Hurstville with 3 bedrooms and big yard.
What street in Stanmore was that in?
Cardigan Street, 111 Cardigan Street.
Okay. And what sort of work did your father do?
He was a tailor. He worked for Cratchley's in Newtown. That
was a large tailoring business?
It was, yes.
In King Street?
Yes.
Okay. And your mother?
She was a dressmaker. She worked for David Jones, made everybody's wedding dresses, all her friends' wedding dresses, the whole, the bridesmaids and everything like that. So, yeah, she was a beautiful seamstress.
Okay. So then you ended up at Beverly Hills Girls.
Yes.
And what was that like?
Well, that was a brand new school with a lot of brand new parts to it. Like we had a cooking room and a gym, and yeah, it's really, really nice, brand new.
A large school?
Just girls.
Okay. And what did you like best at school, high school?
Probably not a lot. I enjoyed biology. hated maths. I enjoyed cooking and the physical part of, doing the physical things, yeah.
You applied to become a nurse, to do nurses training. How old were you when you applied to do nurses training?
16 and 8 months.
And what attracted you to nursing?
I was always going to be a nurse, right from being a little girl, as lots of little girls want to be teachers or nurses. I always wanted to be a nurse, and the fact that my mother's friend was the matron made it a little bit easier.
What was the matron's name?
Enid Knight.
And Enid was the matron of Marrickville District Hospital?
She was.
Okay. So do you remember going for the interview?
I do. My mother took me, and I met Enid, and I met Jessie Kroll, who was the deputy at that time. And in their wisdom, they decided that I could start earlier and be a cadet nurse, which meant that when my school finished at 21, I had to wait 4 months because I'd started 4 months earlier. So I started with them.
So how was the interview? Was it
Very informal, very, very warm, and I think they probably thought, gee, we'll miss this recruit if we don't take her now. So yes, they let me start earlier.
So they told you on the day that you'd got the job?
I think probably they did. I can't really. Yes, I think they did. It wasn't as formal as it is now going for interviews. Yeah.
And how much later did you start?
I can't remember when I went for the interview, but I started in May, on the 28th of May, 1962.
Okay.
And there were 3 schools that were taken. 3 schools? January, May and September. Mm-hmm.
So 3
intakes
of student nurses.
Mm-hmm.
So you said you started as a cadet nurse. Mm-hmm. How was that different from being a student nurse?
Nothing. I was treated exactly the same. I started PTS, which is preliminary training school, with the group that I started with. There were 10 of us, and 5 of us finished.
Okay. It was a 4-year training?
Yes.
Yep. So first day, do you have any memories of your first day?
Yes, I do. I wore a green suit, as women did in those days, or girls. Some of us came with our mothers. My mother came with me. Some girls were from the country, so they were alone. And we had this very, very rigid, starched uniform to put on.
What colour was the uniform?
We had a white collar, and it was grey and white stripe. And the collar was so heavily starched, it used to rub at our necks. And we wore brown horn shoes, which were ugly, and grey stockings. Not very trendy for young 17-year-old girls. Yeah. And a white peak cap. The cap had a U cut out in the centre that signified the year that we were in. So that was, we had to get dressed in our uniforms. So
the first day, what did you do?
First day we got dressed, unpacked our bags, and then our mothers they all went, and we were collected by the tutor sister and went to the tutor school, which was a house facing Livingston Road, an old house facing, set up with beds and everything for a...
Okay, so at the back of the hospital?
Yes.
Okay, so... while you were so you did class for
6 weeks. We did PTS for 6 weeks, like a 9 to 5, day. And we ate in the dining room. We were taken to the wards to show us the wards, and then yes, we were taught how to make beds with, as I've mentioned in that, perfectly enveloped corners, and take temperatures and all the basic things, and not to hurt the patients.
Let's talk a little bit about your classmates that started with you in that group.
Mm-hmm.
Some from the city and some from the country?
My friend came from Maxwell, which is in the North Coast, There was another girl from Malangani, which is near Casino, and the rest of us were local, or some local girls, Punch Bowl. Yeah.
Okay. And you lived in?
We lived in.
So was that a requirement?
At that time, yes. Yes.
Okay. How did you feel about living in?
It was great fun. I did get homesick in the first while. I used to go home on the weekends and come back on Sunday night during PTS, and I used to be homesick then. I'd ring my mother and have a little cry, and she'd say, you know, you've got to get that veil on your head. That was the main object of the exercise. So after that, you know, we settled down, and you know, you were busy, you worked hard, you know, on the wards, and we had great fun living in. That at the end, keep going. At the end of each floor, there was a day room. There was a little ironing room and a day room with jug and coaster. And there was a fridge with 2 eggs and a couple of tomatoes, and we'd all congregate down there. Always talk about our senior nurses, not very favourably, and less favourably about our staff, our sisters on the ward, and commiserate with each other and have a cry and a laugh.
So you'd each get a single room?
Yes.
Okay. Can you describe the room for me?
The room had a wardrobe, a bed, a window, a chair, and coming back on the other side there was like a desk, not unlike this, used with a mirror, used for a dressing table or a study desk. And that was the room. But that comfortable. We could manage to fit quite a few in the bed. Sometimes sitting around laughing and talking. So yeah, it was good.
So on a floor there might be 20 rooms?
Oh no, there wouldn't have been 20. There was a couple of bathrooms, and I guess we were kept together as first year, second year, third year, night duty was separate again so that they could at least sleep.
On different floors?
Mm. Yeah, night duty got moved up to another floor where we were all on night duty together. Mm.
Okay. So you had exams and tests during PTS, and you passed those,
Yes.
and then you went to your first ward.
Yes.
What ward would you...
Because I was the baby, I went to children's ward. And children's ward in those days was just a very large room, probably not much larger than this, with beds and cots. And there was off that ward there was 2 private beds, and there was for adult patients, and there was a ward for sick nurses, you know, nurses' sick bay. And yeah, the children we cooked for the children on a Sunday night. You know, they might have a boiled egg, or the kitchen didn't, and or a sandwich or whatever or Julienne ice cream, whatever they, you know, wanted.
How many kids were on the ward?
Oh, gee.
Patients?
That's testing my memory. 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 there, 7, maybe 9, 12, something like that. Not many.
And these was like what they call a Nightingale-style ward, an open ward?
Yes, but it was square. Nightingale wards were the other wards, yeah.
Okay. So on a shift there would be yourself...
Me.
And
the sister.
Just the 2 of you?
Yes, yeah. And on night duty you were there alone.
Okay. So you were 17 and you were with yourself and the sister,
yeah,
with all those sick kids.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Were you nervous?
I don't think I was. I was probably more scared of the hierarchy than I was of my ability. Not that I thought I had any ability. I don't think I even thought about that sort of thing. You know, you just, this is, you know, you do that, and I did it. And
Okay, so day shift would start at...
Well, it was supposed to start at 6 to 2:45, but as you, in the other wards, the male and female ward, you'd start a lot earlier than that to make sure that you did as many sponges as possible before the senior nurse came on duty.
Okay, so should we run through a day, like...
In one of the wards?
Yeah, so you'd get up...
Yeah, you'd get up, not very happily mostly, and go to the kitchen in the dining room, and they'd have bread and butter and jam and tea, and you'd have that if you were running early, and then you'd go down to outside the offices and read the report. And now the report was written by the night duty sister about each patient's progress through the night, or any new patients or anything that was to be given or checked or whatever. And then you'd go to the ward and start sponging patients. The night staff often, if they weren't too busy, would sponge patients as well, which meant those poor patients were woken up incredibly early and washed. And in those days, anybody that had a a heart condition or very, very sick, they were sponged, not just given a bowl of water, they were sponged. Yeah. And then breakfast would arrive. It came in a big trolley, and it was served by the sister on duty, and or tea and coffee, or cereal, which was like clag porridge, and cornflakes, and the senior nurse did that with a runner, which would be the junior nurse. And then the pan room was a major event in every junior nurse's life, and which meant that we had water sterilisers in those days, and you'd be sweating with steam everywhere, and you scrubbed every conceivable piece of monometal that was in there. So you had vomit bowls, sputum mugs, pans, bottles, and they were all scrubbed and boiled. And then you cleaned the toilets and the bathroom, which were attached along the same path. And then your senior nurse came and checked your pan room, and checked it almost with white gloves. Not, she didn't have white gloves, but she checked everything was incredibly clean. It wasn't to make sure it was clean, it was a discipline thing, that made sure that we did what we were supposed to do. Then, lunch was the same as breakfast, and then this is as a very junior pleb I'm talking about. And then, pan rounds, everybody got a pan. There was no screens in my early days. I think I mentioned in there, they just had big blue screens on wheels that were pushed around the patient, and not terribly private for the patient, but sometimes they had to be used. Yeah.
What sorts of things were these children on the children's ward? What sorts of things were they being treated for?
Tonsils and adenoids. Everybody had their tonsils and adenoids out when they were young. Appendix. Injuries like there was a little boy that was hit with a cricket ball in the head, and I remember him. Mainly that sort of thing, nothing terribly serious.
So after your first ward, you went back and did another block. How was it arranged? A year?
You did your term in children's wards, and you were rostered after that. I think we did a 2-month term. So I went to women's ward after children's ward, and then I would have gone to male ward. That would have been my first year.
Okay.
And a term of night duty.
Okay. How long were you on night duty for?
2 months, and it was horrendous.
And what were the hours on night duty?
10 till 7:15, I think. 10 o'clock we started, yes.
Okay, so you didn't have any more study blocks in that year?
All the time. We had lectures, yeah.
So were they study days or?
They were just lectures that were rostered by maybe a urologist, an honorary doctor would give our lectures, pharmacology, surgical, ENT, all of those normal type of things. So we went to lectures and then we sat an exam.
Okay. So if you were working on a ward and you had to go to a lecture, you just went? Okay.
If you were on days off and were at home, you were expected to attend. If you're on night duty, you were expected to attend.
Okay. So if you were on days off and you had to go to a lecture, were you paid for that?
No.
Just on pay, do you remember what your first
Not very much.
pay packet was?
Not very much. No, I don't. But it wasn't. But we had food and board. So not that we ate in the dining room. We were all quite slender in those days, and because we didn't, eat very much in the dining room. Breakfast we always went to if we were on a morning shift, and of course we all smoked in those days. So it was, to see how many cigarettes you could get off, you could have in your time off, in your meal time.
Were you allowed to go out from the nurse's home at night?
Yes. Yes. If we were going to something special, we had to get a late pass, which was controlled by the home sister that looked after the nurses, and we could get a normal pass till 12. And if we had a ball or something to go to, which was fairly common in those days, we could get a late pass, which was till 1. That we had to come in, present ourselves to the night sister, and get escorted to the nurse's home. But there was a little side trick to that, and I think that's in there as well. If we were out and didn't have a late pass, then you'd arrange with one of your mates to say, look, I'm going to be late, I'll ring you. There was a phone on each floor, and she'd come down in a lift, open the door and let us in. So that was very common. Very common.
Okay. So just on social life, what would you go out together as a group, or would you?
Sometimes we did. Yeah, sometimes we did. We used to go out for coffee a lot because social life as far as boyfriends was difficult. So
where would you go for coffee?
We used to go to Petersham actually. I can't remember the name of the place we used to go to. We used to go there. Yeah.
Okay.
As a group.
So it was a coffee shop open at night?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So second year
came along, and we did a term of case. It was called cases, which meant that we looked after the patient going to theatre. So you gave the pre-med, which most patients in those days had. You prepared them as far as any shapes that were required, and we used a cutthroat razor, which was pretty daunting to me when I first used one.
Do you remember doing your first shave?
Oh, I do. It was an orthopaedic shave, which was quite extensive, and we soaked safety pins, the razor, and that was all we soaked. We soaked them in Dettol and Spirit the night before. Then we shaved the patient, and I'm sure that poor patient had, half his leg cut off. But then we swabbed it all down with metho again. He must have been in incredible pain. And then we wrapped the area to be operated on in sterile sheets and pinned it with safety pins. And so that was the. And then you were summoned to theatre by bells. I can't remember how many was for each ward. So it was 2 from our ward, bong bong, and then the man with the trolley would come down. You'd escort the patient to theatre, and then you'd get the same time bells to go back, and you'd go back and get the patient. And sometimes they still had a Goodell's airway in their mouth. You'd bring them back in the lift, or you'd make the bed, which was made differently to a normal bed, and put them in the bed, and hopefully they regained consciousness enough to. Nothing ever happened. It was.
So they recovered on the ward?
Yes, they did. We didn't have a recovery. We didn't have anything like that. We had 2 theatres.
Let's talk about those theatres. What sort of work was being done in them?
They were very busy theatres. We had cholecystectomies, prostatectomies, nephrectomies, tonsils and adenoids, appendicectomies, like nearly everybody had their appendix out. A lot of general surgery. There was a second theatre that was used mainly for orthopaedics, just for extra sterility, I guess. Sometimes in an accident they might do burr holes, you know.
What are burr holes?
Burr holes is when they drill a hole to release any blood that might be collected there. They were busy theatres.
And these were generally local people?
Yes, they were local people, yeah.
So what sort of community was Marrickville
Oh, it was a great community.
then in the 1960s?
Yeah, great community. Busy. Marrickville Road was very busy. I remember just coming here now, there was a milk bar first off across the road there. Yes, across the road. Then there was a pharmacy and there were 2 hotels, menswear stores, women's wear stores. It was very busy.
Okay. And the sort of population, so these were working people?
Yes, they were.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fairly mixed or fairly sort of Irish and English background, or?
There was during that time a beginning of a Italian community. I think they were Italian or Greek community that were moving into the area. But it was a thriving little suburb.
So a thriving little hospital in a thriving suburb. And it had a casualty department.
Yes, it did. Yes, and that was very busy as well. All sorts of butchers chopping fingers off. I can even remember his name that I won't mention because he did it regularly. Very busy. And the honorees did a clinic. They would do a clinic for ENT or something like that. And I have that stamped there.
Like an outpatient's clinic?
Yes.
Okay. So you talked about doing cases.
Yes.
Just let's go back to that for a second.
Yeah.
What exactly was cases?
It was looking after pre- and post-op patient to go to theatre. And then, and that's just what we did. That was you worked a Monday to Friday, which was really good. And you did every operation, every patient that was going to theatre. You looked after them totally.
Do you remember your first time working in theatre?
When I first went to theatre as a nurse?
Yeah.
Oh, yes, I do. I went kicking and screaming. I was terrified, like we all were. And, it was daunting. And the person, or one of the people that was in charge in theatre was severe. So severe. So do you want me to continue on my theatre? So there were 2 of us, always 2 of us, one ahead of 4 weeks ahead of the other. And on a Saturday, we would clean all the trolleys, every piece of monometal that existed with Bonami. Bonami, if you know what Bonami is like, it's powder and you put water in it. And then you'd clean it all off, and then you'd go over the top with methane. The theatres were hosed out once a week by the wardsman. Every morning when we got there, we cleaned the walls with spirit and Dettol, tile walls, and then set up for the procedures that were to go on that day. There were 3 sterilisers. They were water sterilisers. So it was a very... we were always hot and burnt, and burn your corneas when you opened the lid, and there were tanks in the roof that used to be filled and boiled to be used as sterile water. All the instruments were scrubbed. We didn't use gloves in those days. After a case, they were all scrubbed, re-sterilised.
You had to learn how to lay out the different instruments for different operations.
Yes.
So was that just trained as you were in theatre?
Yes, it was. And when you did your first case, your theatre sister was watching you, and it was very nerve-wracking. But most of the surgeons were lovely. Well, I would say they all were. They were very understanding and taught us, and were never cross with us if we gave them the wrong thing. We had to thread our own needles, not like today when they're atraumatic. So you held a needle with a forceps and you threaded the catgut through the hole with lots of nerves happening. And
with gloved fingers, right?
Oh yes, if it was scrubbed,
of course.
with gloved fingers, which makes it more difficult, But atraumatics were only just coming in those early years. So,
what's an atraumatic?
An atraumatic is when the suture is attached to the needle. It's one thing.
Okay. Do you remember the first operation that you...
Oh, it would have been tonsils.
Okay.
It would have been. But I wouldn't have done instruments. I would have done the sucker, which is the nurse that stood behind the surgeon and sucked out the blood from the patient's throat. Yeah. And the more senior nurse did the instruments with the sister watching them.
Okay. So the scout nurse, what they used to call a scout nurse?
No, not in that sense. No, you both did. Yeah, scout nurse is when you want the scrub nurse wants something that she doesn't have. She runs off and gets it and brings it back. Yeah.
Okay. So with the sucker and doing that sort of thing, would you just wait until they told you when it was time, or
probably,
and then you got the hang of that?
Yeah, probably, yes, because you wouldn't have been confident enough to just do it on your own bat.
And that would suck into a big glass bottle,
yeah.
And then you'd empty the bottles.
That's right.
Okay.
And there's one story. Should I repeat one story? One story of two girls that were ahead of me. They were as terrified as me. And one girl was doing the instruments, the more senior one, and the other one was doing the sucker. And the head theatre sister came in and hissed at her, "Sucker." So she left the theatres with swing doors, went to the tea room to prepare supper for the surgeon, and while she was there realised that she'd been told to suck, and came back through the doors, picked up the sucker and continued as if nothing had happened. Nobody said anything. And it's a funny story, and I can still see both of them today. Yeah.
So preparing supper was part of
Absolutely.
a role as well?
Yeah, for the surgeons, anaesthetists, yeah.
So they'd have some supper after the operation?
Tea, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And they had their own room opposite our change room.
Okay. So when did you first go into theatres? Was that in... Third year.
Mm-hmm.
So first and second, you...
Second you did casualty as well.
How did that work?
That was terrific. We had three lovely sisters down there that taught us a lot. They were kind, understanding mothers. Yeah, that made a difference, I think. Yeah.
Was it 24-hour casualty?
Yes, it was. And when you're on night duty, shall I keep going? When you're on night duty, the casualty bell would ring that you heard throughout the hospital. And the nurse that was on casualty would just open the door. I mean, it was probably, nothing ever happened, but it was probably fairly dangerous. You wouldn't do that today. She just, I remember my first patient that came in had tried to gas herself, came in by ambulance. And I was there alone and the ambos were great, and it's just what we did. You know, we didn't think anything of it.
How old were you at that point?
18. Yeah.
Had you done any, did you cover any sort of mental health psychiatry in your course?
Not really, no. A little bit, but nothing like it is today. No.
Yeah, okay. So casualty was in second year, third year theatre, and they would be, how long was the period in theatre?
2 months.
Casualty was 2 months?
Yeah, all the terms were 2 months. Night duty was 2 months. Terms in each ward was 2 months, yeah.
Okay. And night duty in casualty, or would that come around? Was that part of... So you could be on... When you were in casualty, you might do nights, or it's a separate...
Yes, you did nights in casualty, yes. Yeah.
Okay.
And when nothing was happening, you just went and helped whoever was the busiest. And it was a great camaraderie we had between us. It really was.
Let's talk a little bit about that. Why do you think that was?
Why do I think that was? Well, we lived together. We all cried together. We went out together. We holidayed together. Anybody that had a new boyfriend would all hang out the window and see if he fitted the bill and was good enough, and we all shared each other's clothes and shoes. Very extensive wardrobe. Went to stay at each other's homes on holidays, you know, the country girls, and the city girls would stay at mine. It was a wonderful experience. For me, it was a wonderful experience, and I maintain that I had learnt life skills during my training. But then other people during their training said they were so bullied, and we were, that they are quite scarred from the experience. But, you know, for goodness sake, got to get over that.
So that would be bullying as in how the system worked when you were like a junior and so forth. So can we talk a bit about that?
Well, I can remember one experience I had. I didn't think I was bullied, but thinking about it now, I think I probably was. I was 17, had just come off my first rotation, children's ward, went to women's ward and discharged a patient. I'd never discharged anybody before, and the senior nurse, apparently when you discharged a patient, they were supposed to sign a book, and I had not done that, and she screamed at me from one end to the other. And of course I was so terrified anyway, and I can remember, you know, almost crying. And and that same lady, as I mentioned in my piece there, when we went to the dining room, we all had designated tables where we sat, like PTS sat 1, first, second, third, fourth. And the ladies in the kitchen had cleared all the tables and just had the fourth year table ready to eat from. And I was told to sit there, which I probably did. And this same lady that had screamed at me came in late as well and picked up her plate and cutlery and moved it to another table so she didn't have to sit with a lowlife, you know, junior pleb.
So the dining rooms even were hierarchical.
Oh, absolutely.
Did the sisters that lived in, did they live in a separate area?
They lived on the first, the ground floor.
How many floors in the nurses' home?
5, I think. I think they lived on the ground floor. A matron lived in, she had a flat on the ground floor. And I think they all lived there. And they didn't have to live in like we did. But going back to the hierarchy, if anybody senior to you by even 4 months came to a door, you had to step back and open the door for that person, for them to walk through. You stood with your hands behind your back to to be addressed or to address somebody. And that was, it didn't hurt, it was what we did. And I can remember putting salt in the sugar basin of the doctor's dining room though. That was something that was always good fun.
What other sorts of things would you get up to to amuse yourselves?
To amuse ourselves. Well, there was a lady that worked evenings in the nurses' home, and she had a trolley, and on the trolley she had replenishments for each day room, like the eggs and Twida's bread and everything. And the nurse's front door was locked, and every time the bell rang, she used to have to go and answer the bell. So she might be on the second floor.
So she was like a kitchen worker,
a domestic lady. Yeah. And so when she'd come back, of course, her trolley wouldn't be on the second floor where she'd left it. It would be somewhere else. And we were supposed to have our lights out at a certain time, and she'd come up and say, well, are you going to bed or aren't you? And we'd say no. This is, of course, when we were more senior. When we were first there, we'd switch the light out till she'd gone. And, nothing, harmful. Yeah, so.
By fourth year, how are you feeling when you were working?
Oh, good. Yeah, quite confident. We were confident and we were calm. Whatever was presented to us, we just did it.
So what sorts of roles and responsibilities would a senior nurse have, like a fourth year nurse?
She would, she'd go onto her shift, knew which staff she had, and she'd write down for them what they were to do, and herself, of course. Not doing pan rounds or things like that, but, medications, dressings, IVs, heparins, anything that needed to be done, she would write the list and was responsible to make sure that each task was done and the charts were done. And she'd go with the doctor if the sister wasn't there.
When would you start to give medication and do?
Probably second year, I would think. Yeah.
And IV drips.
Probably second year. And suction. We come to suction again, but it was different suction. It was called Wangenstein, and it was 3 modules held up with rope on an IV stand. You can still look it up. It's still in, Google it. And then it had tubes in it, and when the water went down, it sucked from the wound, and then Redivac came in, which was a totally sealed unit, and you didn't have to change the bottles. So each time you walked past the patient with Wangenstein, you just checked that the fluid levels were, and yeah.
So you might have to change the bottle.
Oh yes, we change the bottles all the time. Yeah.
Okay. And when you finally came to the end of your training, you sat a state exam.
Yes.
Was that all day or?
Yes, we went to Sydney Uni in the Great Hall. We studied hard. Actually, one of the nurses that was my junior nurse topped the state finals, and we did study hard. But because we were a smaller hospital, in reference to, say, somewhere like PA, we did everything. They didn't get to do what we did, so we did everything. And it was quite scary. Do we know enough? Are we going to? We'd done 4 years. Had we learned everything? That there's so many subjects to cover. Had we missed something? So on the first day we did 2 papers, a morning and afternoon paper, 3-hour papers, and then the home sister, when I first started, she came with the present home sister when I was finishing, and they brought our lunch into us, and it was really was very comforting to see her, even though she had a very severe exterior, and then we did our second paper, and then the third paper, and the next day, and that was it. We waited for our results, and we all passed.
How long did you have to wait?
I can't remember how long we waited. It was probably 6 weeks or something like that. Yeah.
So you continued to work in the hospital until
yes.
you got your results?
Yeah. And the girls that I was with, my school, they finished in the May. I had to continue till the September. So I finished on the 31st of August.
1966. Okay. So you mentioned that 10 of you started. There was 10 in a group.
Mm.
And how many of you finished? Okay.
Mm.
Why do you think, were different reasons why people dropped out?
I think probably some of them didn't realise, the same as today, what nursing really entails. You know, they see Florence Nightingale and, soothing somebody's brow, and it's not like that at all. And some of them stayed, for only a few weeks. Others stayed till maybe beginning of their second year. But 5 of us continued.
Okay. People dying. Do you remember your first experience with someone dying?
I do. Your senior nurse, if you hadn't given, just apart from that, if you hadn't done a procedure like give an injection or any procedure, do your first dressing or something like that, your senior nurse always said, have you done this? No, well, come with me. And supervised you and taught you. And that was the role of the senior nurse, to teach the juniors. Yes, I do remember my first death, and it was with my senior nurse, and I can't remember. Yes, I can remember. It was not pleasant, but you just did it. As I said previously, you wash the patient with a Dettol solution, and did various other things that I won't.
Yep.
And then you wrap them put them in a shroud, a paper shroud that we had, and then you wrap them in a sheet with various labels, And then the wardsman brought the mortuary trolley, and you accompanied. In the middle of Marrickville Hospital, there was a laneway that went down through. The nurses' home was on one side, the hospital was on the other. And you went down the lane, the rickety old lane, in the rickety old trolley, and put the patient in the mortuary. And
was it in the daytime or the night time?
Either. And night time was, I don't know why it would be more daunting, but it was. Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about the physical layout of the hospital.
Yeah.
So the main entrance, if someone was to walk into, what was the main entrance?
Yes. Main entrance. The main entrance, there was an office on the, there was maybe a receptionist on the right-hand side as you walked in. And the next part was a corridor where we read the report each morning. It was matron's office, the deputy's office, and the officers, like the pay clerk and the other officers down there. And then on the other side of that was another room, on the other side of the main entrance, another room where the stores were. And then there was a staircase. The first staircase went to our ward, then it branched up to female ward. And then, that was main entrance. Oh, and then as you walk further from the main entrance, another little flight of stairs, and straight ahead was children's ward. Okay,
and where was casualty outpatients?
Oh, casualty was a separate entrance further down Lilydale Street. There was an entrance there, but of course you could get there. You could get there through the hospital as well.
Were X-rays done at the hospital then?
Yeah.
Were they done on the ward or?
No, they were done in an X-ray department, which was next to children's ward.
Okay. So if there was, say, maybe up to 40 student nurses a year, is that right? 10 in a group?
Yeah, well, that seems excessive actually. I wouldn't have thought that many
So 4 groups a year.
Maybe 5, maybe 3 stayed. Yeah, not that many.
Okay.
Yeah.
So always on a shift you'd have...
We'd have a senior nurse, a junior nurse, and probably one in between.
Okay.
Well, maybe. No, my memory's getting a bit dim. Yeah, I would think 2 junior nurses and a senior nurse, and one in between, so 5.
Okay, on each shift.
On each day shift.
Yep.
On each night shift, or 2.
Okay. Afternoon shift.
The same as the morning.
Okay. And then there'd be a charge nurse or someone in charge of the ward. That was the ward sister,
Yes,
right?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. What are your memories of some of these ward sisters?
Well, I remember my ward sister. She was an excellent nurse. Not fierce and bristly, but just a very good nurse, knew her stuff. We all respected her. The sister in charge of women's ward was not as easy to get along with. Would leave, or one of my friends, still my friends, was standing there with her hands behind her back, waiting to be acknowledged. And she stood there for some time. And one of the doctors walked in, and she immediately acknowledged him. And he said, when you've spoken to nurse to see what she wants, that's fine, we'll deal with it then. So he, it was a form of bullying, I guess. Just... we were nothing.
Were most of the ward sisters single women?
Those 2 were. There was another male ward sister. She was excellent. She trained at PA. She was married. The sister that was in children's ward wasn't. Most of them were single. Matron was single. Deputy was single. Yeah, most of them were single.
And male nurses?
Just at the end of my training, they were coming into vogue.
Okay. Your friends, you said you're still in touch with a lot of your friends that you trained with.
Yeah, I am.
So these were really strong, solid relationships.
Absolutely.
That you built. And do you think that was because of the experiences that you had?
I do, because we shared so much in our training days in those 4 years. Yeah, I do. And we can still have a laugh about them as well.
Yeah.
There was that same girl that was standing with hands behind her back. She was probably a bit more outspoken than we were. We wouldn't have said bird or goose. And she, her and her mate, they were in the pan room, and her mate rapped on the pipes. She was above in the other pan room. She rapped on the pipes. And as my friend put her head out the window to see what she wanted, she tipped a pan full of hot water to wet her. But unfortunately, she let the pan go, and it bounced all the way down the Liddell Street. And then,
this was a metal pan,
oh,
right?
yeah, monometal. And then another time, they were obviously very bored in the pan room because she fed down a lavage tube, which was a long rubber tube, down the drain, and was going to pour water down it to wet the same friend, and let the tube go. And then she had to present herself to the male ward sister, saying that it had been borrowed or whatever, not to say that what she was intending to do. So we did have some fun. It wasn't all tears, and we did have fun.
Yeah. So what, in a nutshell, like in, say, a couple of points, what do you think Marrickville really gave you, your training, the experience?
Absolute life skills, yeah. And still now, like, next door neighbour will bring the baby in because she's cut her head, and he's not sure what to do, and people want to show you their rashes and you know, things like that. Yeah. No, I've had a great life of nursing. Yeah, great life at theatres.
So you went into theatres okay, sorry, we'll just go back a second. You graduated,
Yes.
you had a graduation event, or
Yeah, we did.
where was that held?
It was held in the hall. Down the bottom of the nurses' home was a big room. It had a little kitchen, and it was held down there. And we had a speaker, and
Who was the speaker?
I can't remember. I'd have to look. What's her name? Oh, she's quite a well-known person. I can't remember.
That's okay.
And we were all presented with our certificates. We had a cake, and family and husbands came, and
How many of you were graduating?
in that was the whole year. So there was probably maybe there was 5 of us, maybe 16. There's a photo there of that.
And did you get to wear the sisters'
the veil? Yes,
veil,
got the veil
at your
on
graduation?
The head. Yes, get the veil on the head. A totally useless piece of headwear. It really is. You can't, if you're lifting a patient or anything, but it was very important to us to get that. That signified what we'd done.
That must have been a great feeling.
Oh, it was. It was wonderful. Our graduation wasn't the year that I finished. It was the following year. I think it was probably May or something like that. Yeah.
So after you finished at Marrickville, do you remember when you left the hospital?
Mm.
So you lived in for all of that time?
Mm.
Where did you go?
I got married 6 weeks after that, and we lived in a half a house at Hurlstone Park, and I started work at Masonic Hospital in their theatres.
So you decided during the course of your training that theatres was where you wanted to work?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, so from being terrified of theatres in the beginning, did you do a second time in theatres and a third time? And
No, you only did one.
You only did one?
One term, yeah.
So within that period you decided...
Yeah, I did. Loved it. I loved the precision of it all. Yeah.
The organisation of it all. Yep. Okay. Where did you meet your husband?
I met him through a friend that had come in through casualty, and he was a friend of that person. And the friend that came in through casualty had his appendix out, of course, didn't everybody? And then met his wife, because she was doing cases at that time, so she looked after him. And I met my husband through him. Mm.
So he came in with pain,
Yeah.
abdominal pain,
Yeah,
had his appendix out,
yeah,
met his future wife.
yeah. And my husband was looking after him.
So he came into casualty with him.
Yeah. Mm.
So they were local boys?
Yeah. My husband grew up down on Sydenham Road, next to Australian Water Mills, and worked at the mills, and worked for Stamina. And then his family moved to Greenacre. And so that's where I met him, from Greenacre. Mm.
Okay. So you worked in theatres at Masonic?
Yeah. And I went to work for a GP in Wardell Road, Robert Allison. I worked for him for maybe, 2 years, but missed. I mean, it was really lovely.
What did you do with the GP?
Oh, I did just nursing things, like nursed the new babies while the mother was cared for, gave injections, and clerical. It wasn't very stimulating. So I went back and saw matron, and she said, come back and go to theatre, and I did. So I went back to Marrickville Theatres, and probably stayed there till close to 70, and left to try and have a family.
Okay. So that was a busy GP surgery?
Yeah, very, yeah.
Okay.
They were, and he used to operate, and GPs in those days did tonsils and adenoids and appendectomies, and hysterectomy. They did it all, you know, even though they didn't have their FRACS or anything like that. They did it all.
And they do it through the hospital?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Was it common for people that are trained at the hospital to stay there working? Or to come back?
The girl I wrote that for, she came back. She came back to tutor. In theatre, there were 2 that had trained there. No, probably not common. No, they went off to other places.
Okay. So you said you've had a great life, working life, nursing?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. And anything else you'd like to say?
Yes, there were a lot of factory injuries, I guess, that came through CAS. Broken limbs. We had a plaster room in CAS. Australian Woolen Mills had, I think, a few thousand staff with big machinery, big weaving and looms and machinery. It was probably quite an industrial area here, rather than what it is now. It's quite trendy, I think, to live in Marrickville now. But yeah, it was a working class area, definitely.
So big industry and small industry, like the Woolen Mills, Ford Motors.
Yeah, I could get that information from my husband, but I can't remember right now. But the Woolen Mills would have been one of the biggest factories. Yeah, when we had a lot of wool that we managed in Stamina Clothing, which was very big on children's school wear. Was probably more industrial than anything else in Marrickville.
And how did the hospital respond to that? Like, if there was an accident or...
Well, the ambulance came up the ambulance drive and you opened the door and did whatever you needed to do to treat the patient, I guess. And because the CAS bell rang throughout the hospital, somebody always knew something had come in, so they would come and check and make sure you're okay. You were there on your own until the sisters came on duty, probably at 7:30 or 8 in casualty. You probably started at 6:45 or 7, I can't remember that. But you were there on your own until somebody came and helped you. Yeah.
Any accidents in particular that you remember?
No, not from my time, but I do remember that there was a big train smash at Sydenham, and they came through casualty, and we had 2 well-known orthopaedic surgeons. One was called Dr. Werrett, and the other was Dr. Bryan, and Dr. Werrett stood at the door and said, and designated where each person was to go, depending on their injuries. I was a little girl then, but I heard that story, and it could manage. It could manage a lot of things. Yeah. The resident doctors lived above casualty. I never went up there, but some people did. One of the residents married a very good friend of mine. She was my junior nurse on night duty. I mentioned that in there too. We all smoked in those days. We used to nick into the patient's bathroom and have a quick ciggy near the window, and not thinking that the night sister would smell it. I mean, we were very, very naive. We were incredibly naive about most things in life. Yeah. So about the hospital, there was one lift. Under the stairs, not the main stairs, the stairs within the hospital, there was, we kept all the oxygen cylinders there. At the end of male ward, there was a building that would have faced Marrickville Road and Lilydale. There was a building, and I think that was used for one of the doctors and his family. There was an annex at the end of women's ward, so you walk out onto a veranda. That was on the first floor. You walk out on the veranda, along the veranda, and there was a 2-bed ward, a little annex there. You know that? And then at the end of male ward, there was a single room that was a single private bed. There was a sterilising room at the end of each surgical ward, where all your sterile stock was kept, and it was cleaned by the junior nurse on night duty, and more scrubbing of monometal, more boiling. And she'd set up the dressing trays, you know, with a galley pot and the small swabs that we made. We made all our own stock, our cotton balls and swab sticks. And
when would you make them?
Junior nurse on children's ward made them. So you'd just get your cotton, roll it, and then when it was autoclaved, it would all puff up to little cotton balls like we have today. Swab sticks were made just with a wooden stick, and you put the end in water and rolled the cotton on it. And I'm pretty sure, I can't remember for sure, but I think we made our combined dressing, so you had a width of muslin, white muslin, and then you had a width of like cotton wool, and you folded it and then cut it. Yeah, we did make it, I can remember now. And we cut it into, we called them colostomy pads or peri pads. So that's how they were sterilised, in cotton bags up into the theatres, and the theatres had 2 autoclaves, did all the sterilising. 2 people cooked a chicken in it. I never did that.
In the sterilising machine?
In the autoclaves. Mm-hmm. And I would never have thought of doing that, but it must have been good.
What was that story? So who were they?
Oh, I know who one was. Oh, I know who 2 were. Well, they must have been there and a bit bored, so they...
Student nurses?
Oh, yeah. And they cooked a chicken in the autoclave, and you would think that it would smell, you know, that you'd smell the chicken, wouldn't you? You'd think. And we did... there was no waste in those days, you know. If cotton balls didn't get used or dressings didn't get used, they were and they were clean, they were re-autoclaved. You didn't throw anything out, not like today with all the prepackaged dressings. And we did our own gloves. They were washed and dried, hung to dry, and then blown up to see there was no holes, powdered.
What were they made of?
Well, rubber. Yeah. And then the powder was in. In theatre there was a trolley. You scrubbed. There were 3 scrub sinks on each side. You scrubbed there, came through the doors, and there was a dressing trolley where you got your gown and your gloves, and there was a bowl that held. You opened it and spread the powder and put your gloves on. In a different way than they do it today in theatres. It's different, but yeah. What else about the building? There was laundry chutes. A laundry chute from female ward down to male ward. The men it was in a bag. The men used to come and there was a very big laundry down the back on that lane.
So there was laundry staff who worked there that were employed by the hospital,
yeah.
right? They
did all our uniforms and all our linen, and we washed our own masks, our own bandages, and they were dried. I can't remember how we dried them, but we must have dried them. And we made our own enema soap.
How would you make that? What was the ingredients?
Big pot, soap, water, big spoon, stirred it on the stove. Every day room on the floor, each floor had a stove and a fridge, and at night there was always a jug of hot milk for a patient that couldn't sleep or something like that. So you made the enema soap. We used to use Lysol, phenol, things that you wouldn't use today. Yeah.
So some of the wards were the big Nightingale-style wards?
Yes.
So just describe one of those for us.
Well, I'll just say that the surgical ward had a sink, not in the middle, but a third of the way along, and in front of that was the sister's desk. So while you're cleaning the brow, so she had her beady eye on you. I make it sound terrible. It wasn't really that bad. And then there were probably 1, 2, just beds along each ward. At the end of the ward was a sterilizing room, as I mentioned before. Go through a door before that, and there was a linen room that you stored all your linen, and the bathrooms. There were maybe a couple of toilets and a bathroom and a pan room. No, the pan room wasn't there. It was in the middle. So that was the, yeah.
And infection control was?
Well, we were taught to do dressings appropriately. In those days, we swabbed down the centre, down the sides of an incision. Now it's a more circular motion, I think. We didn't have wounds that broke down. Never. I can never remember a wound breaking down. We were just very careful. That's the way you were taught to do it, and you didn't contaminate anything. And yes, everything was the trays, the dressing trays were set up the night before and covered with a sterile towel sheet, and normal saline was used to clean the wounds.
And some of these patients would be there for a
long time, not like, in and out in a day. If you had a cholecystectomy, you were probably there for 10 days. Appendicectomy, I had my appendix out there. I was probably there for 7 days, something like that. Yeah, patients stayed a lot longer, but they all went home healthy,
You had your appendix out while you were working there?
No, when I was 9.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And is that where wanting to become a nurse came from?
Oh, probably encouraged the thought, but I think, all little girls want to be. I was born at the end of the war and in 45, so Red Cross was an organisation that little girls belonged to. I still have my badge, and you wore a little white thing tied behind your head and a little red cape, and I don't know really what we did, but I was in the Red Cross, so, and post-war that was really, I guess through the injuries of the war, it was significant. So, so I had my appendix out there, and the sister that bought our sandwiches to our state finals was in charge of the ward when I was there, and she did have a bite. But she really was a lovely, lovely lady, yeah.
Who was the head doctor? Who was in charge of the medical...
nursing, the superintendent.
Yep. Medical superintendent?
Yep.
Who was that?
When I was training, I can't even remember. I remember when I was back there in theatre, his name was... what was his name? I can't remember, it was Wriggles or Wiggles or something like that. He was a young man, a big job for a young man.
And who was the director of nursing? Well, the matron?
The matron was Enid Knight.
Okay.
Yeah, from the beginning to the end. I only got called to her office on one occasion, and that was because I complained there was no hot milk, because everybody got to meals late. It was just how it was. And by the time I got there was no hot milk, and the porridge was like clag, as I'd mentioned before. And I said to the cook, can I mention his name, Mr. Buckley, that, you can't have cold porridge and cold milk as well. And he reported me to matron, so I had to go to matron, and she said it was inappropriate and, don't do it again. And
What was your response to her?
I'd never been sent before, and I think I was probably in fourth year by then, and it mattered. It mattered, but I wasn't going to, lose any sleep over it or anything like that.
So matron was kind of distant from the student nurses, like you didn't have much to do with the matron?
No. She'd come to the ward and see the patients, and she didn't come to the ward to inspect, but she probably did. All the things we did that were totally useless in the patient care, like you had to have all the blinds level, all the wheels of the beds facing the same way, all the pillowcases and the towels with their openings facing the same way. I mean, this didn't at all improve the patient's health, but it was discipline for us. And I can remember another funny story. I'll just tell you, it was one of the girls, same girl with the sucker and the tonsils. She was asked to give a pan to a male patient, and his leg was in traction. In those days, traction, you held weights on the end of the rope. And he'd taken those off, he put them in the pan, and when she came to collect the pan, she went and had to heave the pan off the bed and struggled to the pan room. Well, everybody was watching, everybody knew what was happening, but she did take it in good fun. And there were light times, lots of light times, and but it was a good life for me.
Barbara, thanks a lot for your time.
My pleasure.
It's been fantastic.
My pleasure.
Thanks.